Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
So just 1 second, 1 second.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
It's hard to follow such a powerful presentation, so thank you, Robert, for it. And hello, everyone. My name is Huang, and I am Taiwanese in origin, but I live and work in the UK. I wear many hats, and one of the hats that I wear is a researcher and a university assistant professor at psychology department in the Keele University in the UK. And another hat that I wear is I am a forensic interviewer. So since my PhD training at Cambridge, I was trained about the NICHD interview protocol for interviewing children and in the forensic settings. So usually it's child sexual abuse cases or other severe physical abuse cases when children are involved. So in my line of work as a forensic interviewer, I guess the pleasure and pleasure, that's a bit weird. The wonderful thing about being a forensic interviewer is that people come talk to you and they tell you stories. And I am fortunate enough to hear so many, sometimes really hard stories about men being sexually assaulted. And well, my friends and colleagues, they would come talk to me, tell me that they had been sexually assaulted and didn't even realize it until I pointed it out. They would tell me, oh, I had this sexual encounter. And then I would be like, oh, but it seems like you did not consent to that action. And then they would like freeze and started to like boil down in tears. So I find that really, really shocking and difficult to deal with. And so when I wear the other hat as a researcher, I would really like to find out more about men's victimization in sexual abuse cases. According to a North American NGO, a recent online survey says that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men were sexually assaulted in their lives. So it's quite a big prevalence. Yeah, so I think sexual assault or rape is not that uncommon, and probably it's less commonly admitted amongst men due to various societal pressures and toxic masculinity culture, which I will cover a little bit later. So that's what I am going to share today, my researcher had. So I'll give you a little bit of background about gender and sexual victimization, especially rape, and the current study. So what study I have done to kind of tackle that and findings so that you have some numbers. So numbers don't lie. And then I would really appreciate some discussions with you. Yeah, so first, gender, well, the challenge in rape investigation is that it is quite difficult to tackle, and it's actually quite prevalent. So according to the crime survey in the UK, in about 700,000 people were sexually assaulted. And this number was 2017-18. And in the most recent one, it's about the same. It's 700,000 and 730, yeah. So that's similar number. And only about 11% of the victims are actually willing to report to the police. And 91.4% of rape allegations kind of slip out of the prosecution and investigation process. So out of that number of people, this is a survey. So people will admit something, but they may not necessarily report to the police. And after they report to the police, it may not actually be submitted to prosecution, and then even less would get a conviction. So prosecution rates is strongly dependent on victims' credibility. Well, think about this. If you are investigating a sexual abuse or a rape cases, well, you can use the DNA evidence to establish the fact that the sexual intercourse happened. However, you cannot use that to establish whether the victims consented, right? So it is a lot about interviewing about the victims to establish what actually happened, to know whether they consented or not. So that's why it's quite difficult to even if you have the DNA evidence, it's quite difficult for the conviction to happen because of the difficulty in establishing consent. And guess what? Gender and sexuality of the victim has an impact on how we perceive the credibility of that victim. And this is an infographic to show you. This is the pink little human beings are represent the number of people who reported to the police. And the turquoise human beings are represented numbers of people who, oh, sorry. Oh, what happened? Can you go back, please? Oh yeah, thank you. So this number is the ones who are reported or submitted to what is it? CPS. CPS in the UK is Crown Prosecution Service. So it's not Child Protection Service. So I need to clarify that for the cultural context. Yeah, so it's from police to the prosecution. And then the green one is actually the numbers who are prosecuted. And the brown one is the one who actually convicted. So you can see that this we call attrition in rape cases. So there's huge attrition in the cases going through the criminal justice system. And of course, gender and sexuality plays a role in that, in those cases. A rape has historically been called a very gendered crime. Why is it gendered? Well, male rape was only recognized legally as a crime in the UK until 1994. And even if you look into the legal definition of rape, it's in the UK, it's the penetration of penis to a vagina. So effectively, you can't be raped as a man. So now they added a penetration as another sexual assault crime, which is equivalent of rape to represent different sexuality. And 80% of the rape victims were women, according to the crime survey in England and Wales. And that means 20% of the victims were male. But I personally think that 20% is underrepresented because of all the barriers male victims would come across during this process. And well, with a lot of theories, and yesterday our keynote also talked about the rape culture, rape myth, and the toxic masculinity that is prevalent in our culture really makes it difficult for male victims to come forward, because if they do, they tend to be blamed more, and because they are blamed more because they are violating that masculine image of being strong, of being not possible to be not vulnerable and being victimized. So they tend to get blamed more, according to previous research, and they are not man enough, and they are seen as not man enough, right? So that really creates barriers for male survivors to come forward. And when you add sexuality into the picture, it makes it even harder. So that you compare heterosexual victims, lesbian, gay men, and bisexual victims, they were blamed more compared to their heterosexual victims. And sexual minorities are, however, more likely to be victimized. And there's statistics about that too. And male victims are, when they are labeled as gay, and they were blamed more for what happened to them rather than receiving more compassion. And they are also deemed as of lesser concern for what happened to them, which I find really disturbing. Bisexual victims are also assigned more blame for their assault when they compare to homosexual and heterosexual victims. So victims' sexuality and gender really plays a role in how people perceive how responsible they are and how credible they are. And that's why I want to conduct the current study. So my study, the aim is to really examine how victims' gender and sexual orientation impacts young people's perception of rape cases. Why do I want to focus on young people? It's because I think the gender stereotypes and our the understanding of gender and what the stereotypes associated with each gender is changing slowly. It's changing, but very slowly. And the younger generation brought up in a more liberal society, and with all these social medias and a lot of information available to them, are changing their concepts about sexuality and gender as well. So I really want to focus on young people and see whether those older research data will still hold for younger generations jurors. So my research is designed as an online questionnaire. Well, this was conducted during COVID, so I really didn't have much more choice other than doing an online study, but it's an online experiment. So I have 6 rape case scenarios, and each of them are paired with a fictitious name. And that is, we would describe that this person is a female or male, and they have exclusively dated a person of the other gender or their own gender, or they have dated both gender. So that we created scenarios to reflect the 6 different conditions. So male and female and heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. So that's 2 by 3 within subject design. So all the participants would read 6 of these scenarios and then make a judgment about how credible they think the victims are, and how responsible they think the victims are, and how responsible they think the perpetrators are. And both quantitative data and qualitative data were collected, but I did not include the qualitative data today because of for the interest of time. So participants, I have 134 participants. Well, try as we might, we couldn't get more male participants to participate, which is what a shame, really, what a shame. We couldn't get more male participants. So if you have any strategies to help me reach more male participants, I would love that, please. Yeah, and age, they are between 18 to 24. The choice of this age is because that this is the age that sexual victimization is actually the most prevalent according to the crime survey. So this is the group that is most likely to be victimized sexually. And yeah, as I said, the materials is 6 rape case scenarios where victim gender and their sexuality were manipulated. And these victim scenarios were actually taken from real rape cases from the online open source, where people disclose their sexual victimization. And we kind of shorten it a little bit, but without changing too much of the content, and then present and of course anonymize them, and then present it to the participants. And quantitative measure is 1 to 5 rating. So 5 being the first is credibility, victim credibility. Like 1 is not at all credible. 5 is extremely credible. And 2, victim responsibility. 1 being completely not responsible. 5 completely responsible, and perpetrator responsibility the same. Quantitative, I just asked the participants to tell us why they think they make this judgment. What's the reason behind it? Yeah. So results. The fun part. Well, I like my researcher hat. So we run a MANOVA, so multivariate analysis of variance to look at whether victim gender make a difference to their ratings. So the graph here is the victim credibility rating, and you can see the orange is male victim scenario, and red is a female victim scenario. And you can see both of male and female victims are rated as similarly credible. And there's no significant statistics. So that's not significant. That gender difference is not significant. But the gender difference is significant in the victim responsibility rating. So you can see that here, male victims are blamed a bit more. And that, even though that is quite a low number, that is still significant. And perpetrator responsibility, there's no gender difference here. And the effect of victim sexuality. Interestingly, our study didn't find difference of the victim sexuality by itself. So by itself, you can see that these numbers are quite similar. They are not that different. So it's not statistically significant. However, if we unpack that, we look at both sexuality and gender, there's quite interesting result here. So there's significant interaction between the victim's gender and their sexuality. So here you see the victim credibility rating. Oh, well, the orange line is homosexual, and the red line, or the red line is heterosexual, and the brown is bisexual. So you see the homosexual and bisexual victims, regardless of their gender, they are rated similarly credible. However, the heterosexual female victims are rated less credible. And when we look at the victim's responsibility rating, it's quite similarly showing that male victims are being blamed more. They are rated as more responsible compared to female victims. And here, the bisexual victims are attributed a little bit less responsibility compared to the other 2 groups, the other 4 groups. And finally, the perpetrator responsibility rating, you can see that it's crisscrossing here. So interesting things happening here. Bisexual and heterosexual victims, there's male their perpetrators are attributed less responsibility compared to the female victims. Whereas when it's homosexual, the male victims, their perpetrator are attributed more responsibility compared to a homosexual female's perpetrator. Well, that's quite a lot of information, isn't it? Yeah, well, I welcome any discussion later. So yeah, don't be shy. I love discussions. Yeah, so what we have found, well, to summarize what our finding is, victim gender is more important in victim responsibility rating. So we see that across all these scenarios, male victims are attributed more blame, more responsibility for what happened to them compared to females. And victim sexuality by itself is not significant. However, it does compound how we perceive these victims with their gender. So it's compounding the effect of gender when you bring sexuality into the discussion. And there's no gender difference in credibility rating for homosexual and bisexual victims. However, heterosexual females were rated as less believable compared to males and compared to all the other groups, which has really important implication for practice because, well, guess what? Most rape cases, well, at least who are willing to come forward in the legal systems were female, and most of them heterosexual. Yeah, and perpetrator responsibility, we see that for heterosexual and bisexual victims, it's female victims, their perpetrators are blamed more compared to male. So it's like an implicit victim blame here happening with the male heterosexual and bisexual victims. So their perpetrator are blamed less compared to females. But when it's homosexual victims, it's male victims, their perpetrators are blamed more. And these findings on victim gender were more consistent with previous literature. However, the sexuality findings were not completely congruent with the previous literature. And I think it says a lot about the changing gender stereotypes and the changing perceptions about gender in the younger generation. So I see hope. I see hope with this data with our younger generation. Well, I feel so old now talking about our younger generation. So of course, any study will have their limitations. So my limitation, definitely one of them is participant gender. We have so many more female participants compared to male participant here, and participant gender can definitely make an effect. And in my future study, I am gonna collect more male participants and really look into that. And the next is participant age is limited to this young generation. And in my other study about rape myth across the population in the UK, we found that age is actually an important factor in accepting rape myth. So the participant age is really important. So I am working with my RA to get more participants across different age group. And of course, ecological validity is an issue. These are all online cases, and people might guess what you are trying to do with your study, and they can easily guess, especially because it's within subject design. They see 6 different scenarios, so they are easily guessing like, oh, you're trying to do this, okay, yeah. So ecological validity is definitely an issue. Yeah, so conclusion. Well, rape affects everybody, including both men, women of all diverse gender, sexuality background, and ethnic background. I have another project on that too. So combating the biases against stereotypes that is associated with gender is really what's important for us. It's not labeling whether this is male or female, but we need to combat the bias that we hold against gender in order for everyone to access justice. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm honored that you are here. So yeah, thank you. Next speaker.